Awesome. Alrighty, I think we're good to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining me for BSides Charlotte 2026. My name is Gabriel Schram. I'm excited to be here to share my talk with you called Illuminate the Grid, Building Telemetry Through Purple Teaming. This is one of my favorite topics in cybersecurity. This is what I work in every day, and I'm really excited to get into some of this content here, especially related to Tron theme. Makes me really excited to dig into some of this content. So, a little bit about me. My name is Gabriel Schram. I'm a consultant in advanced services at Arcova, previously known as MorganFranklin Cyber. That rebrand actually just happened this week, so I'm excited about that as well. I work in our Cyber Fusion Center. So our Cyber Fusion Center is made up of our SOC services, and attached to the Cyber Fusion Center is advanced services, which is made up of detection engineering, threat hunting, penetration testing, as well as purple teaming, or any of those security operations types of activities. So day to day, my role is purple teaming and adversary emulation lead, as well as contributing to our broader threat intelligence projects that contribute to all of our other services within advanced services and our Cyber Fusion Center. So now that that's out of the way, let's discuss some of what we're actually covering. So here's a little bit about what we're going to be covering today. I want to discuss effective purple teaming versus ineffective purple teaming. I'm going to go over exactly what goes into a purple team, what a purple team actually is. I want to briefly address that. And then number two, really the foundation and base layer of building an effective purple team plan is based around consuming threat intelligence. How are you consuming threat intelligence, and what threat intelligence are you actually consuming that's worth that value? And then we're going to be translating that threat intelligence into an actual purple team test. Today, I'm going to be using an example based on the threat actor Muddy Water. I'm going to be going to a few details on that here in some of the sequential slides. But we're going to translate some threat intelligence on a specific threat actor. We're going to map it to MITRE and translate that into an actual purple team test that I've recently done. And then number four, arguably one of the most important pieces to come across here is finding the value in the test results. You want to actually build a telemetry and eliminate the grid. So with that being said, let's get into some of my key observations as I'm building out this presentation. So as I'm going through these slides and through this talk, these are some of the key observations that I wanted to address that I'm going to be driving across over the course of this talk. So number one, as I previously mentioned, threat intelligence really must drive purple teaming. And at a higher level, threat intel needs to inform and drive actions. Otherwise, it doesn't hold the value that you're paying for it. You want to make sure that you're having the exact sources of threat intelligence mapping to your purple team plans. And then number two, purple teams produce higher quality detections and inform threat hunts. So adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures reveal gaps that generic or out-of-the-box rules might miss. And purple team results are meant to really inform SOC detections for those and drive threat hunts as a result of purple teams as well. And then number three, good purple teams close the gap between alert deployment and validation. Now, what do I mean by that? A detection that hasn't been tested against either a real attacker or attacker behavior is really just an assumption of thinking it's going to work. The results of a purple team determine which gaps to close first based on the threat exposure and the outcome of these purple team tests. And to get a little bit more into the details on that, purple teaming tells you whether your data sources are positioned to detect real adversary behavior. And if they're not, it'll expose exactly what to build or tune next. These are meant to produce higher quality detections that are also going to be more tailored to your environment. This allows detections to be very specific for your stack that you have in the testing environment. So with all that being said, it's important to address what purple teaming actually is. Purple teaming is exactly how it sounds. Purple teaming is a collaboration between red and blue team operations. It's a little bit of offensive, a little bit of defensive. However, there's some key differences to some of the other offensive testing that takes place. Purple teaming tests detections, tools, and preventative controls. We are not testing people. I'm not trying to socially engineer any end users. I'm not sending any unsuspecting phishing emails or unsuspecting phishing calls or anything like that. This is meant to be an iterative and enriching process. This is not adversarial. When I'm doing these purple teams, the SOC is fully informed of what I'm doing, and that's intentional. We want to observe any of our trigger detections as a part of our purple team tests, and we want to make sure that we're taking in and analyzing any telemetry that we generate over the course of our purple team testing process. So where pen testing and red teaming might try to poke holes and be unsuspecting, we might try to be intentionally noisy. We want to make sure that the alerts are working as they should, because part of purple teaming is making the fidelity of specific alerts simply better. And this gets into my next point. Effective versus ineffective purple teams. You can do a bad purple teaming. It is possible. An ineffective purple teaming doesn't really map to a threat actor campaign or threat actor tactics or techniques. A bad purple team might execute tests without validating the detection outcomes. And like I previously mentioned, it might generate alerts, but you don't assess the quality of those alerts or the fidelity. Maybe too many alerts are triggering or not enough. And all in all, a bad purple team will fail to translate findings into actionable improvements. And this is where the key value is. So we want to make sure that we get at that. So looking at this other side, what makes up an effective purple team? A good purple team will be mapped to specific threat actor behaviors. This will ideally be mapped to MITRE attack. I want to get into that in a future slide as well. But a good purple team is going to validate detections against real-world attacker behavior. We're going to turn findings into concrete detections and response improvements. All of the results from purple teamings should be used to feedback right into SOC operations and threat hunting, and each of these outcomes should feed the other as a part of our process. Now that we've kind of addressed what a good purple team looks like, what purple team is, let's take a look at some of the key core concepts that we're going to be getting into today. So, as I previously mentioned, purple teaming starts with intelligence. Intelligence-driven purple teaming is exactly the type of purple teaming that will be the most effective and will be the most valuable. So we're going to be looking at muddy water as a threat actor today. And like I mentioned before, this is not meant to be a deep dive on muddy water as a threat actor, but there's a few key reasons why I chose muddy water for this. I'm going to go over a few details first. Muddy water, for those that don't know, is attributed to the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence. They go by quite a lot of different names. Several different organizations have given them a different alias, but I'm going to be using muddy water for the duration of this presentation. The most important thing here is that it is the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence. They've been active since 2017 until now. And they're a great example for this because they target all sorts of organizations. It does not matter your industry or your sector. They're really expanding their operations. They're relevant right now. And there's been tons of documented campaigns and tons of documented TTPs. And it's really a gold mine for purple teaming activity. So I'm not going to go into every single detail on specific TTPs that they've used, but I've picked out some of my favorites here that I think would be great for emulating a purple teaming execution chain here. So muddy water, first and foremost, they're going to be using WScript or mosh.exe for their initial execution. That's a consistency that I notice across several different sources. And in many campaigns, they're executing PowerShell with specific flags meant to hide their behavior or bypass defenses. And more broadly speaking, they're trying to live off the land, and they do it very well. Now, what I mean by that is living off the land binaries are legitimate binaries on a target system that have a legitimate use that threat actors tend to abuse with malicious intent in an effort to evade defenses and blend in with more normal activity. WScript and Moshta are great examples of this. PowerShell is a great example of this. And even that next point here, trusted cloud services for payload delivery. This is also living off the land. It's exploiting a trust relationship inside their intended target to deliver a secondary payload. Now, a trusted cloud service could be anything from Google Cloud. It could also be file sharing services. It could be things like Dropbox. It could be anything from SharePoint or anything like that. And then the last point here, it's important to at least bring up remote monitoring management tools being used for persistent access. Remote monitoring management tools really have a legitimate purpose for many IT functions, but they can also be abused by threat actors for remote access. So these TTPs, based on map to muddy water, and really stood out to me across multiple campaigns, multiple sources. And I think at a high level, these TTPs we can definitely work with when we're trying to put together an execution chain that we can kind of emulate. Now, when we're discussing threat intelligence, it's also important to mention that mapping to MITRE is extremely important when we're doing this process. Trying to map a purple team to some kind of indicator or anything like that is going to be much more fragile. Notice how a lot of the things here have a legitimate purpose and they're being exploited. Therefore, it's much more important to try to emulate threat actor behavior rather than just building a plan off of their indicators. So let's take a look at an actual execution chain from Muddy Water that uses some of these tactics, techniques, and procedures. So intelligence-driven purple teaming. Here is a perfect example of a Muddy Water execution chain on their target. All of these have cited sources used across multiple campaigns, and each of these tactics map right back to MITRE, which will feed right back into our purple team plan. It's extremely important that we map to MITRE because MITRE threat actor behaviors will end up mapping to multiple threat actors and not just Muddy Water. So we look at this first box. Muddy Water uses VBS script and JavaScript as their initial payload. Now, that initial payload is typically executed via WScript or Mosh.exe. Now, like I previously mentioned, these are signed binary proxy executions. These have a legitimate use in an organization, but Muddy Water uses them to execute their initial payload that could come in the form of some kind of macro in a Word document or some kind of JavaScript file. Now, that JavaScript or VBS script file invokes WScript shell ActiveX object to spawn PowerShell. Now, the key piece here is that JavaScript or that macro is spawning PowerShell. ActiveX object in this context is simply a way for scripting languages like a VBS script or a JavaScript file to access or control Windows system components. But the key piece here is that WScript or Moshta is executing the initial payload, and that initial payload is spawning PowerShell as a child process. Now, the previous technique that I mentioned is that PowerShell is often used with specific flags. Those flags are often used, they have a legitimate purpose, but in this context, they're often used to remain silent, operate in the background, so on and so forth. But the most important piece of this step is that PowerShell runs using those flags and downloads a disguised executable from a trusted file sharing service. And then that disguised executable is usually masqueraded in some way, shape, or form. I noticed that disguised payloads can be renamed to evade defenses. This is a common TTP used by Muddy Water. And then that payload is sequentially executed from a writable folder. Now, all of these TTPs map to MITRE, and there are cited sources in campaigns of Muddy Water using these tactics, techniques, and procedures. And all of these can be used and taken in and incorporated as a part of a purple team test. And this is the next piece that I'm going to be getting into here. So this is an actual purple team test that I built out and tested recently. So this maps directly back to Muddy Water and exactly to some of those TTPs that I previously mentioned. I chose some of the ones that might work best for this purple team test. I also built out two artifacts for this purple team test. The one is the initial payload, and the second one is a sequential payload. So I built a JavaScript file, and I used WScript to execute pteam.js. My JavaScript invokes WScript.shell ActiveX object to spawn PowerShell as a child process, just like I previously mapped. PowerShell runs with those flags. Those hidden flags, specifically execution policy bypass and Windows style hidden, things like that are meant to evade defenses. PowerShell then downloads our second created artifact for this test. We created a Golang payload, we compiled it, and then changed the file extension. So we uploaded pteampayload.txt to a trusted SharePoint URL. PowerShell fetched that txt file, and then it renamed that txt file to exe, and then executed that payload from a user writable folder. Now, this was just a benign payload with the purpose of testing, but it still serves with this. It serves the same purpose. So this is really a perfect example of how you can come up with a purple team test that maps directly to MITRE and has been documented to be used by threat actors in this sequence. So we have campaign analysis and we have threat actor behaviors being mapped right here in this purple team test. Now, a key part of this, notice that outside of the two artifacts that I've created, all of these are living off land binaries. I mean, WScript is legitimate, PowerShell is legitimate, and SharePoint is legitimate. So this is really meant to emulate threat actor behavior. Now, it's important to each step of this purple team test should have a specific outcome. If I'm permitted, there could be alerts that get triggered. I could be stopped in my tracks at any one of these steps, depending on preventative controls that might be in place. But this is really the perfect example of how you can take threat intelligence, put it into a purple team plan based on a threat actor, and map it to MITRE. So what do you do with the outcomes of these purple teams? So we have each step within that purple team test, right? Now, the outcome of each of those tests should have some kind of indicator that it worked, or there's visibility on what's going on. So after each step, if there is a detection that is triggered, that is a validation of controls that are in place. And you could also take that opportunity to tune and document any type of logic inside those alerts that you might want to change to increase the fidelity, to make them more effective, or include additional information as a part of those alerts. Now, if there's a step of this purple team test, or if we're able to execute this entire purple team test without any blockage, there should be a hunt lead that's generated for activity that does not generate alerts. That is because if there is specific activity that is mapped to a threat actor, maps to MITRE, and we know that it's not triggering alerts, we know that there is some kind of potentially suspicious activity that could be hunted for in that environment. Therefore, any purple team test or any step of a purple team test that is meant to trigger an alert that does not is now a hunt lead. In addition to that, it'll be a detection build. And then after that, we'll reconduct a purple team test to validate these detections that are built and repeat this iterative process. And all of this is meant to be the outcome of any type of purple team. What I just mentioned is a multi-step purple team, but we can have multiple of those in a single purple team plan. We can have multiple chained executions. We can have multiple detections that get triggered and test multiple log sources and data sources to make sure that your telemetry is getting taken in and observed properly and analyzed properly. And this is where I get to my next point. And that is finding value in coverage. How can you actually build telemetry from these purple team findings and illuminate the grid? So this is where I'm going to get into some expected detection signals. This is where I'm going to be discussing what preventative control should be in place and what that source activity looks like when you're doing these types of alert generation or threat hunting or purple teaming. So here, finding value in coverage, expected detection signals. So in each of these steps of that purple team execution chain, there should be some type of source activity where we can generate alerts from. This is where data sources are going to be from specific process creation events, child processes, so on and so forth. The first one we have here is WScript exe spawning a child process. That's the detection signal. That might be something that SOC analysts want to look into. This might be expected environment. It might not be expected environment. It could also depend on the user. These are all things to take into consideration when you're dealing with the prioritization of the outcomes of our purple team testing. But the source activity for that detection signal was WScript creation event being logged while executing pteam.js. We use WScript to execute our JavaScript file. That should be logged somewhere, and we can alert on it. If anything, we can also prevent it from happening. These are all things that you want to take into consideration based on the outcome of each step in the purple team planning or purple team execution, rather. The next detection, the next detection signal that we have was WScript spawning PowerShell. The source for that, PowerShell exe process creation event logged with WScript exe as a parent. This might not be exciting in your environment. You might want to have somebody looking into this because this is somewhat unusual. And the common theme going down this list is that each of these is an increasingly large red flag. So we look at this next one, command line arguments, the execution policy bypass, and the window style hidden parameters that can be used with PowerShell. Now, like I've been driving across, a lot of this activity does have a legitimate purpose. There could be a legit IT function. There could be update processes. However, this is most likely done by a handful of users or a business unit. Execution policy bypass and window style hidden being used in PowerShell isn't normal for every user to be using that on a regular basis. So it might be worth looking into. We want to detect or prevent unauthorized use of WScript exe spawning PowerShell. This is more telemetry that we can generate, have preventative controls around, or trigger alerts on. The next one, detection signal, PowerShell exe making an outbound connection to SharePoint.com. This is where we use PowerShell to fetch our disguised payload. SharePoint.com is trusted. If that's trusted, maybe we make an exception, but PowerShell making any type of outbound connection should be something that you might want to look into. outbound network connection from PowerShell to SharePoint is definitely logged somewhere. And if that's something that you want to alert on, you can do that. You can generate alerts. If that's something that you don't want to be done, you can hunt for that activity. And getting to these last two really big red flags here, if I was permitted to do this, you definitely want to have some type of alerting in place. And that is the file rename event. We had our disguised payload as a TXT file. The PowerShell changed the extension from non-executable to executable. That file rename event is logged. pteampayload.txt was renamed to pteampayload.exe, and that should be logged somewhere. And then it should also be logged when it was executed from the user's public folder. And this brings me to my last expected detection signal. And that would be unsigned executable being launched from the user's public folder with PowerShell as a parent. This is a huge red flag. Any type of unsigned executable that can be launched from a user writable folder with PowerShell as a parent is definitely something that you want to have either prevented altogether or generate a lot of noise within your environment. And that's exactly what we did with this example perp plan. So we had pteampayload.txt changed to pteampayload.exe. That's a process creation event logged with PowerShell exe as the parent when it becomes executed. And all of these detection signals should be considered as a part of that earlier mentioned decision tree. Was an alert triggered? Was there a preventative control that stopped me altogether? And if there was a new alert that was generated as a result of this purple team, we need to go back and validate that through retesting of the same purple team test to make sure that the proper alerts are getting triggered when they need to. Or alternatively, if there's preventative controls that you want to have in place based on your appetite for risk. Now, tying it all together, this is meant to eliminate the grid. We want to have more visibility. We want to have more enrichment for our security operations. We want to have our SOC analysts more informed. We want to have leads generated for our threat hunters. And we want to have synergy between each of these areas as we engage in this iterative loop of enrichment throughout all of our security operations. That's going to start with threat intel. For purple teaming, threat intelligence drives the test. Threat actor TTPs determine what you emulate and how you do it. Every result of a purple team test, every result of a purple team step even, you need to ask yourself or determine if detection fires, your controls are validated. Do they need enrichment? Do they need tuning? If there's no detection, you suddenly have a hunt lead, and the detection can be built on that and then sequentially retested. And then lastly, these detections are tailored to the environment that they're tested in. A lot of attacker behaviors will work around any out-of-the-box or generic detections that you have. And purple teaming is specifically tailored for your environment using your stack and your data sources, lining up against specific threat actor behavior. And this is exactly how you tie it into building an effective purple teaming. And now you have some methodologies and some awareness based around how being deployed is not the same as being validated. And this is exactly how you expose that gap. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining me today. I'll be sticking around after the conference on Saturday. If you want to stick around, I'll be happy to answer any questions, connect on LinkedIn. But thank you all so much for joining me today. And that is my presentation. Thank you.